Okay, so you're going through a hard time, you're struggling with something going on in your life, something really has you down or just frustrated, and you know, a friend comes along and tells you what we've all heard before, right? Tells you, remember, God never gives you more than you can handle. And that's meant to comfort us and to, help us realize we're going to get through what we're going through. But I think that's the wrong approach to take. And here's why. Okay, so let's look at some examples from the Bible. So, Moses, when he's leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, he gets to the Red Sea. What does he do? Nothing. There's nothing he can do. It's all God. God gives him the ability to part the Red Sea and provide safe passage through. So that was definitely more than Moses could handle. All right, so let's continue along. And in Egypt, when the people are in the wilderness for 40 years, there's a point where they begin to complain about food, and they're essentially very hungry and feel like they're starving. So, uh, again, what does Moses do? Nothing. There's nothing he can do. He can't provide for all of them. So he turns to God, and God provides manna, manna from heaven. So um, let's talk about Jesus's disciples. So there's a time when all the people are there and they're around with Jesus, and it's getting late, and uh, the disciples say, let's send these people home so they can eat. And Jesus says, you guys feed them. And they say, that's not really possible. We don't really have enough food. So how did the disciples feed everybody? They don't. they, they give it to Jesus. Jesus blesses it, and then they're able to feed them. So the disciples, that was definitely more than they could handle. Um, so another example, the lame man by the pool. He was there for a long, long time waiting to get healed, but he had nobody to get him into the pool so he could be healed. But so on his own, that was definitely more than he could handle because he'd been there forever. If it was something he could handle, he would have taken care of it. He would have gotten in that pool and gotten his healing, but he couldn't. It was more than he could handle. So Jesus had to come along, and through Jesus, he was healed and he could get up and walk. We all know the story of Lazarus. Lazarus, Jesus' friend, uh, he died. So what he was going through was definitely more than he could handle. Otherwise, he would be alive. But Jesus came and, raised Lazarus. Yeah. Um, we can keep going on. The adulterous woman. She was prepared. She was going to be stoned to death. There was nothing she could do about that. On her own, it was way more than she could handle. But when Jesus stepped into the picture, he told them, he who was without sin cast the first stone, and we know the rest of the story. They all dropped their stones and left. And so, with Jesus' help, she wasn't killed. Blind Bartimaeus, without Jesus, he'd still be blind. That his blindness was definitely more than he could handle. Um, Paul, one of the most important people as far as the Bible's concerned, with writing the New Testament and speaking of God's grace and Jesus. Without God showing up, he would still be persecuting Christians. That's what he was doing. He was killing Christians. Um, So, that's something that he couldn't handle on his own. He couldn't handle uh, finding the truth on his own. God had to step in and throw him off and blind him, and change things. And then obviously the biggest example of this, I think, is sin and death, right? I mean, that's way more than any of us can handle. I mean, and it just is. And that's why Jesus came. Through his death, burial, and resurrection, he defeated sin and death. And he overcame something that we did not have the power to overcome. And so I know it's meant to comfort. I know it's meant to get people to not feel so bad about what they're going through. But I think it's definitely the wrong way to go about it, because I feel like when you say that, it it still puts the focus on the person, and you say, remember, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. And then the person who's going through this horrible, difficult situation at the time, whatever it may be, says, well, why is this so difficult for me then? They start feeling bad. They start looking on themselves. They start wondering, well, what's wrong with me if I can't handle this? You know, and they start questioning themselves. And that's not really what I think we should be doing in this situation. We should be reminding them of where their strength comes from. And their strength comes from God. Their strength comes from Christ. So I think a better way to say it is God never gives us more than we can handle through his strength. Because then we're putting the focus back on God. We're reminding people it's not about you, it's about him. It's about what he's doing in your life. He is your strength. One of the most quoted verses out there is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? Let's remind people of that strength when they're going through a struggle. Let's remind them, you know, uh, my eyes look to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. Well, that's where our strength comes from. That's what gives us the ability to handle anything that we face, anything that we go through. It's not by our own strength. It's not by our own will. It's not by our own power. It's only by Christ inside of us, what he has done and the strength that he has given us. And so when somebody's going through a hard time, don't just tell them God never gives us more than we can handle, because I don't think that is a very comforting thing, honestly. Tell them God never gives us more than we can handle with his strength, and his strength is always with us. So he's going to get you through whatever you're going through. And I believe if we do that, it's a much more stronger message. It's much more powerful. And the most important thing is it gets people to look away from themselves and to look outside to God for their strength and for their help. And so, honestly, God gives us way more than we can handle on our own. That's just the truth. We need to look to him. But he's always with us. And when we remember that he never gives us more than we can handle with him by our side and being our strength, that's when we find real comfort. Thanks, guys. Have a blessed day.